Okay, still testing. Financial literacy. Is it working? Got it.
Okay, ready? Okay, I hope so. It's like anything when there's technology involved, there's always something that causes a glitch. So just welcome to you and to the people that are joining us online. And yeah, wherever you're watching from, I trust that the next sort of 45 minutes is going to be beneficial to you. And if there's just something that you can take away from the time that we're going to spend together, then I'm happy. I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of where we're going to be sort of attacking this week. So it's a 4-week course. Each week is kind of designed with a different theme and agenda. So this week is really, I suppose, maybe the more boring one because it's the introduction to where we're wanting to go. And I think it's important that whenever we speak about money, you actually always have to go back to the beginning. It's one of those things that I think we get caught up in this trap where things don't always work. And if we don't sort of move ourselves all the way back to the beginning, it's very difficult to get out of it. And so I think starting at the beginning is an important place for us just to identify where we are at as individuals with our money management, and then sort of work from there. If we're able to go back to the slides, there we go. Okay, so this is just today. I'm going to be touching on those topics. And again, it's one of those things where it's quite difficult to speak about money and keep it to 45 minutes over 4 weeks. It's not an easy thing to do because it's such a broad topic to discuss. So I'm going to touch on things and some topics you might want me to go a little bit further into, but unfortunately because of time, we're going to race through a few of them. I'm always open for discussion afterwards. We can have a chat. So just to give you a quick introduction of who I am. So those that don't know me, my name is Sheldon. I'm a financial planner. I've been doing this for the last 16 years. I'm actually a trained teacher. So I started my sort of working career as a primary school teacher. I studied at Rhodes University. I left teaching in 2008 and landed up in this part of the industry. And I sort of have, through my migration from teaching into this, my two children were still young. They were 2 and 4 at the time. The two girls that are there, they're a lot older now. But they were sort of at that stage where, as I was doing my studies around the new career path that I was following, I realized that in our country, and I suppose it's a global problem, we have a society problem where people sort of get to the point where they go into the working world and they don't really understand money. They don't understand how to manage money properly. And if you have a look at any stats, I'm going to show you some stats later, it's a major issue. And so as a parent, I sort of stood back for a bit and I thought, how do I change that? And it's one of those things where you start small and you hope that over time it sort of evolves. And as parents, we sort of said, if we start and we train our kids from a young age, hopefully they grow up into adults that understand how do you work with money, how do you manage money better. And so you don't land up becoming one of the statistics that says these people don't understand how to manage finances. And so it was sort of a decision that my wife and I made, is that we would train our girls as much as we could in just managing money. How do you take your pocket money and how do you use it effectively and wisely? And so from a young age, and next week's one is, if you've got kids, if you know people who have got small children, I invite you to bring them. Join us next week, because that's the one that I'm most enthusiastic about. It's kind of the thing that I believe is going to change what we do in it. I don't want to sound flippant, but it's hard for you people to change mistakes that you've been making all these years. But if we can sort of get it to our youth and train them, we hope over time that eventually we create a different society, a different culture of people just understanding what they should be doing with their money. So I found this quote, and I think it's so relevant because it appeals to so many people that I work with. So too many people spend money that they haven't earned to buy things that they don't want, to impress people that they don't like. And it's so true, because I can tell you so many people that I deal with, when they know they can get money or they can access money, they become quite desperate to get the money, because in their heads, they've already started spending that money. They've already got a plan for that money before it's even become available in their bank account. And because of those sorts of trends that we live in, that this instant gratification, we land up doing things with our money, which is not always the wisest thing. So I'm going to start this sort of introduction to this thing with this gentleman, and it's a story that I tell often, and I bring it into almost any topic I'm talking about because I find him so interesting. So if you have a look at the gentleman on the left, I'm going to call him Kobe because that's his nickname. The other name is a bit difficult to just sort of get off my tongue easily. So if you have a look at Kobe, you'll go like, who's this guy? And I'm going to tell you, he's a famous world champion at the discipline that he takes part in. And you're going to be surprised when I tell you what that is, because he doesn't look like the character that should be taking part in this discipline. He's a world champion eater. So Kobe is from Japan, and he grew up in a society where eating competitions were, it was a norm. It is, you wanted to be famous for being the person who can eat the most hot dogs or hamburgers, whatever the competition was. And in Japan, you've got status. If you are a champion in that sort of eating competition, and there are various ones around Japan, and I mean they happen in America as well. You almost had like you had a status. You were a celebrity. And so Kobe decided at a young age that is what he wanted to do. That's who he wanted to become. And if you have a look at him, you go like, it's impossible that this guy can hold world records. It doesn't make sense if you think about the size of some of those sumo wrestlers or just large human beings, how does a young man, I think he weighed 67 kgs only in that picture, how does this man beat any other man in an eating competition? And the story is quite simple. He was determined to change the way these competitions happened. He believed that he could be better than everybody else. And so for a period, Kobe took himself out of society. I don't know exactly where it was, but the story goes that he sort of removed himself and he went out and he lived in a forest or something, isolated from everybody else. And during that time, he worked on understanding his body to the point where he knew at what point he was going to be able to compete in the best way that he could. So he tried eating after he had exercised, tried eating as he woke up. He tried eating on an empty stomach. He tried eating after having something to eat an hour before, whatever it was. But he tried various methods so that he could understand at what point he was capable of consuming the most food. And he came out of this and he entered a competition, and Kobe destroyed the first world record. And we're not talking about he beat the other competitors by 1 or 2 hot dogs. I mean, if you have a look at the record that he broke, it was 25 more than the previous world record. He doubled the amount of hot dogs that any previous competitor had been able to eat. And you go, how does a young man of that size eat twice as much as any other person that's ever taken part in these world championships? And there's various numbers, 97 hamburgers, 30 more than any other man has ever eaten. I mean, 30 hamburgers alone, you can imagine. I mean, that's a lot to consume. But he's eaten 30 more than the next best person. 2006, another world record that he breaks, again, not by 1 or 2. Well, he's got other records where he just beats the competitors. I've taken out specific ones here because they are unique, they are different. What Kobe realized is that what people were doing at the eating competitions was the same thing over and over and over. He realized that when he went and he took part in the hot dog eating competition, so what happens is you sit down, you've got a pile of hot dogs, and you can have any drink that you want. Pepsi, Coke, water, whatever it is of your choice. So those competitors had they were either sponsored or they just had a preference as to what cool drink or juice they would have at the time of the competition. What Kobe realized is if you eat, and we all know it, if you eat a roll and you try and drink, you land up almost creating like a mush in your mouth. It becomes quite hard to swallow. And so you've got this sort of starchy bread that you're trying to eat, and to try and get it down the guys were then obviously drinking, which then kind of doesn't work so well. And he worked out if you remove the meat from the roll and you ate the meat on its own and you dunked the roll in the juice or the water, you could almost suck that roll because it becomes a porridge. And the reason I tell the story is because sometimes we actually just have to change everything. If we keep doing it the same way, yes, we're going to be slightly better, or we might just lose out by 1 or 2 hot dogs and be disappointed. But sometimes you actually have to go right back to the beginning. You've got to remove yourself and you've got to have a look, what do I need to change? How do I become better than what I was before? And sometimes that change is drastic. And that's the only way you become the best version of yourself when it comes to money management. And so I'm going to refer to Kobe over the next 4 weeks because just that story is something that I believe is very important. So what is financial literacy? Financial literacy is basically just the understanding of how do we manage finances? How do we manage the money that we've got? How do we make the correct decisions with the money that we've got? And we're going to have a look at a couple of those things. And just again, using Kobe as the sort of the reference is how do we change the way we decide to use our money in a different way that we potentially can have a better outcome at the end. So there was a survey conducted, and this is done, it's been done over a number of years, and every year they go back and they do a survey. And this is local, it's in South Africa. It's a survey that gets done, and they sort of take a wide range of individuals, all of them working, so all of them earning money, because that's quite important. So I got interviewing somebody on financial literacy if they don't actually have the money to work with. So it's working class people ranging from sort of low income to CEOs of company. And so they've got thousands of people that they interview, and they get this bits of information. So if you have a look at the stats, and I'm just going to put a couple of up there, you'll have a look at a lot of these things are high numbers of people just struggling to make ends meet. And whether you're earning 10,000 Rand a month or 100,000 Rand a month, the survey says that everybody kind of had the same answers. So it wasn't even a major point as to what the income was of the person, but the people that were experiencing problems kind of had the same problems. And the survey highlights for me the most interesting one is that, so the FSCA is the controlling body that I fall under. These are the guys that sort of just monitor the financial services industry. 51% of people are just financially illiterate. And that stems a lot from just a schooling system. I believe it's my own personal sort of thought. So it's a schooling system that doesn't teach our youth much about financial literacy. They touch on it here and there. And if you don't do accounts or economics or business management, you get very little sort of training out of school. And even those topics don't really equip you very well for that first job that you take on, that first salary that you actually receive, and how do you manage that money. I still come across people who have been working for a number of years who can't file their own income tax, simple income tax. It's never been taught to us, and it's a simple thing that I believe everybody should be able to do, or at least have a fair amount of knowledge around those sorts of things. So that's financial literacy. It's a lot. There's a lot to take in, and the more we know it and the more we can teach our kids, I believe, it just becomes an easier topic for people to manage, understand, and sort of get to grips with. So we all know this sort of concept. Economics 101 says you should never spend more than you earn. If you're spending more than you earn, you've got a problem. And unfortunately, according to that survey, most people are in the category where they are spending more than they earn. And it's about being the Kobe and going back to go, how do we fix that? And so we're going to have a look, how do we fix that? And so the first thing we need to identify is that we're all different. So just like we all have different personalities, we all have different money personalities. And your money personality is how you view money, how you deal with money, how you manage your money. And a lot of those things we're going to touch on next week again stems from what you've been taught, how you were raised, what you sort of saw in your home that you were brought up in, what has happened around you as you've kind of grown up. A lot of those things create the sort of personality of who you are with dealing with your money. And so I'm going to go into that a little bit more detail next week as we look at the families. This question often comes up is, how much more money do you need to earn a month to make your life easier? And interestingly enough, I haven't got the newest figure, but this is this is before COVID. A few years ago, I read an article, and again, out of a survey they did, the average number, and you think it's fascinating, but it's actually so interesting when you look at it. The number was around 2,000 Rand. 2,000 Rand was the number that most people said would be the amount of money they need to earn more to put them in a position that they were happier. And you think, 2,000 Rand, I mean, is that the thing that's going to make you happier? And it stems around the fact that if we go back to Economics 101, most people are overspending their income, not by a lot, but by just that small amount that every month is tough. And so in your head, if I gave you 2,000 Rand, you'd go, it'll solve my problems because I'll be in a position where I'll just have enough to make sure that at the end of the month, I'm not running on credit. I don't have that worry of I need to now access money that is not mine. So 2,000 Rand was that magic number? I would imagine it wouldn't be far off that number. The problem with that is as soon as you get your 2,000 Rand, which a lot of young people do, is they chase jobs and they follow that extra little bit. What happens is eventually that 2,000 Rand is insufficient. It's called lifestyle creep. So what happens is you were eating out once a month on the salary that you had. With the 2,000 Rand extra, you now go, you know what, I can eat out twice a month. Or instead of eating out from a takeaway, I can actually now go out to supper and spend a little bit extra. Why? Because I've got a little bit extra. And within a few months, the 2,000 Rand has been gobbled up and you're back at the same place. And you go like, I'm still struggling. But we don't ever take ourselves out of the situation, back to the beginning where Kobe did, and go, how do I fix the problem that I had? Because it's not the financial money that I'm receiving, it's the financial decisions that I'm often making with that money. And this is where it starts. And my wife's here because she's going to back me up with the stories because they're valid stories and they're true. Budgeting is a nasty thing. It's an ugly thing. And she'll tell you when we first got married, I came from a home where my mom kept every slip. And at the end of the month, the box of slips came out and everything was tallied. And that's kind of what I grew up and that's what I saw. And so when we got married, we made a decision that the money that we earn is our money. It's a family money. So it's not a yours and it's mine. Whatever we need as a family in our home, we need to manage it together and we make decisions around that money together. And so when we started, it was a case of us recording everything that we spent money on. And it was keeping slips, and it's not pleasant. It's not nice to have to do that because one is it can be time consuming, but two, there's almost like there's nowhere to hide. You have to be quite honest with yourself because it's there all the time. And so you record those kinds of things. And the reason for it is because you need to know what is happening with your money. There's very few successful businesses that don't run off a budget, where they just operate and hope for the best. But in our homes, we don't seem to feel the need to budget for some reason. And we want to have the successes, all these businessmen who are doing well in their businesses and making heaps of money. But at home with our own money, we don't want to do that because it's hard, it's difficult. Sometimes you've got to have difficult conversations with yourself. Budgeting is crucial. And it's one of those things that over time it gets easier and easier because if you've done the hard work, you become familiar with what you're doing and it becomes easier to record, track things. And so eventually you get to the point where you don't have to do it as often as every month. You can follow trends just from your bank statements and quickly identify. In those beginning days, I could tell you almost to the rand of how much we were spending on groceries and petrol and entertainment. And as soon as one of those things was way out, it was quick to go and identify it and see what was the reason for it. Was it something that we knew had happened? There was a trip or we were going to visit family, and so the petrol price was a lot higher than previous months. Were there a lot of kids' birthdays, and so our entertainment costs had gone up because we were buying birthday presents? You could identify it, and if you could identify it and answer it, then it's fine. If you identified it and you couldn't give a reason for it, there was a problem. We need to then go back and have a look. Is why are we spending in an area that we shouldn't be spending money on? And so your budgeting and your planning is important because the survey again says that people that are doing that, they are more comfortable in the decisions that they make around their money. It gives you the freedom to make calls if you know where the money is going. So many people that I deal with when I have the conversation around it and I ask them for sort of estimates of costing, I'm always horrified how far out they are. So I now do the shopping, and so I've got a good understanding of what groceries cost for a family of four. And we've got two girls who eat very little. So I know what groceries cost. And then I'll have a family of four which have two boys in it, and they'll give me a rand value. I'm going, you're not even eating every day in your family if that's what groceries are costing you. It's because the people have got no idea of what it's actually costing. And so they're just spending, and there's hope at the end of the month there's going to be enough to cover whatever costs there are. So I want to have a chat to you about this, guys. Another story that I love telling. So Ed Catmull. So many years ago, we go back, he was co-founder of Pixar Animations, and he came out of the Walt Disney Studio, and he took over Pixar at a time when, if some of us will, if we go back, Pixar had a sort of a period where they had a lot of successful movies. They had a lot of animated films that came out that were just hugely successful, and it was because of this man. And he says that the success of that was because he ran a tight ship. His team was successful because they worked to a budget. He says that when you create an opportunity for endless spending, he says there's no need for anybody to be creative. As soon as you put that budget on, there's restrictions on people, and you say, we've got to be successful with what we've got, because if we fail at that and we've used that, there's no more resources. It makes people look carefully at what they're doing. It makes them become more creative. And he says it was the reason why Pixar became so good, is because his team had to deliver with the budget that they had. They didn't have this wild sort of endless supply of cash. They needed to be creative. And again, we can tell you stories of us. I went from, when I left teaching, I went into a consultancy business where I was earning a salary, and I made the decision during that was to study so that I could land up in the financial planning sector. During those studies, I then at some point needed to make a break. And I needed to say I needed to go from that into a space where I needed to build up a client base. And so you go from a salary to the next month going, I don't have a client, I don't have a salary, I don't have a cent to my name until I can start building this. And you quickly have a look and you go, how do I become more creative with how we're spending our money? And it goes back to the one that I had up there earlier, budgeting. If we budget, if we plan, you can quickly start working out where you're spending money. You don't need to be spending, and you start becoming creative. So instead of eating out, you go, we still need to do that kind of stuff. We still, as a family, need to have those evenings, but how do we change that? How do we do it in a different way that's not going to cost us this much money and it's only going to cost us that much money? Where do I start? So the first thing, and this is the thing that we try to establish with our girls from a young age, and it's something that I know comes up in the primary school curriculum when they talk about this stuff. You've got to start off and you've got to understand what your needs and your wants are. And sometimes some of those things are blurred because we've made them quite blurry. But there are certain things that are definite needs, and then there's those wants. And it's about defining those and being able to work around those. You've got fixed monthly expenses. You need to identify those. So in your planning, your budgeting, there's things that we can't get away from. One of our needs is shelter. It's a roof over our heads. That's going to cost you, whether it be rent, whether you've got a bond on a property and you're paying off that bond. There's going to be expenses for you to be able to have a roof over your head. There are expenses that we have to have. It's reality. And that's part of our training that we had with our children is when you get pocket money, a lot of people sort of idea with pocket money is it's for kids to save and save and save and save. And so one day when they've got to spend the money, they don't want to spend it because they've never been in a position to have to make decisions on how do you spend money. And so from the beginning, we forced our kids, it sounds terrible, but we forced them to spend some of their pocket money because they had to learn to spend and then make good decisions on their spending. You don't want somebody eventually to have all this money accumulated at age 21. They don't know how to make a good decision with it, and they blow half of it on just a poor financial decision. And so we've sort of trained our kids to get into that habit of spend money but make decisions wisely. I'm going to share some of those decisions that they started learning to make from a young age. From the age of 6 and 7, if you give them the opportunity, they can make a decision that you'll go, that's quite impressive to come up with that decision. Create a salary buffer. So this is crucial to any sort of financial planning is make sure you have some reserve set up somewhere. And you can only get that right again if we go back to the beginning and you've got some sort of a budget and you're managing your finances, that you are able to be in a position where slowly you can just put money aside in a separate savings account or something. I mean, my wife will tell you, we were archaic in the beginning. We had the envelope system. My wife literally just had envelopes and she drew cash and she stuck a little bit of money in each one for various things that potentially may come up in the future. Servicing a car, replacing tires, vet bills, holiday account, whatever it is. And you just put a little bit of money away in all of those things. And 50 Rand doesn't seem like a lot, but you add that up and eventually there's at least something that is going to put that new tire on your car and you don't have to worry about it coming out of the income when you're already struggling. It's those sorts of things of just creating some form of just backup safety for you that at least your expenses are covered. There's nothing worse than being in a situation and go, I need to pay for this rent or the bond. Something has happened. What am I going to do? And so just having that buffer where you can at least say, you know, worst case scenario, something goes wrong, I've got reserves that I can at least cover those costs. And then if you don't already track your stuff, track it. Make sure you know where your money is going because every rand that you are getting has got a job to do. It's for you to decide what that job is with that money. So every rand that comes into your bank account has got something to do for you, and you've got to allocate it somewhere. You've got to make it work for you. So I'm going to tell you the story about John and Susan. So John and Susan are two young people. Let's assume they're in exactly the same space in their life. They've come out of varsity or they've come out of Technicon or wherever it is. They've got into the same job earning exactly the same money. They're the same age and they've got a decision to make. They don't own a car, but they know they need a car for the job that they go into. And so they decide they've got to go and purchase themselves a vehicle. And so John, because he's that type of guy, and he wants his friends to know that he's doing well and he's got this job and he's earning good money, he goes out and he buys himself a brand new car. And it's going to cost him 300,000. It's got a full service plan, so he loves that. It's new. It smells good. His insurance on the car is just over 900 Rand. His installments are that, and he's decided over 5 years he's going to have this car paid off, and then it's his car. Susan's got to make the same decision. But being a lady, she's a bit more sort of financially savvy. She's a bit more careful of how she's going to spend her money. And so she goes, I need a car, but I'm happy to accept that this doesn't have to be a brand new car straight off the floor. I'm gonna have a look at a couple second-hand vehicles, and I'm gonna find one that's still reasonably good, low mileage, still within the service plan. So she's still gonna squeeze 2 years out of a service plan. It's gonna be slightly cheaper, lower installments. So even though she can afford the installments that John can afford because the bank told him he can, she's going, and this is going to serve the purpose. I'm happy with it. And so Susan buys this car and she also finances it for 5 years. So 2 vehicles doing exactly the same thing. The one's new, the one's slightly older. That is it. So Susan, at the end of 5 years, she took the difference between the cost of her insurance on her vehicle and the installments that John was paying. And she said, look, I was going to pay that anyway if I purchase a new car. I'm going to stick this money aside. And she puts it away into a savings account over 5 years. And I've just used a money market account, 7% that she's earned over the 5 years. I've stuck it in there. At the end of 5 years, she gets the opportunity. She says she's going to sell her car, and that's her resale value of that car. So she's lost a fair amount of it, and that's the problem with the car, is that it depreciates very quickly. And so she's got that amount which she puts together. She's got just short of 360,000 Rand that she can now utilize to purchase her next car. Now, there's inflation and all the rest of it, but she's not far off purchasing the brand new vehicle that John had bought 5 years ago. She might have to put down a little bit extra, but she's in a position to buy herself a better car than the one that she was driving. Let's have a look at John. John, at the end of 5 years, got no money just because he kind of maxed out what he could afford on that vehicle. He's got a resale value, which is far more than what Susan's is, but that's all he's got. And so now John only has 175,000 that he can put down as a deposit, and then he kind of has to start those installments all over again. And so if we look at that situation, you got at the end of 5 years, who's smiling? Susan. Susan's in a position where the only thing that's going to go wrong for her now is her car's just going to get bigger and better, because she's financially in a position to just buy a bigger, better car all the time. And it's actually going to cost her very little. She sacrificed the first 5 years when John was driving the newer car to go, if I change the way I do this, I can put myself into a position where I can financially do something different. And that's what it's about. It's about doing the same thing, but thinking, is there something else that I can do? Is there a different strategy I can use to get to the same point? And so Susan is always going to be leaps ahead of John, because John's going to play catch up for the rest of his life, assuming they're the same career path, everything is identical. Susan's created an opportunity for her to move beyond just struggling all the time to actually now having control over her finances. 5 years that she just had to delay the decision of the new car. This is a problem that most young people struggle with, the difference between being wealthy and being rich. Being rich is the person on the left. He's flashy. He wants you to know that he's rich. He earns a good salary, and I'm going to tell you that I earn a good salary because I'm going to show you. And so in my behavior, in the things that I do, in the stuff that I drive, in the house, the entertainment that I have, I'm going to show you that I'm rich. Because the wealthy side, nobody can see. That's happening behind closed doors. It's the investments that you're building up. It's the cash in the bank that you have, where you know that doesn't matter what people think. I know I'm comfortable moving forward. And so for young people, they struggle to differentiate between these two. being rich and being wealthy are very different. A wealthy man doesn't need to show that he's got the money because he knows behind everything he's comfortable, he's going to live a happy financial life for as long as he needs to. And that's something that we want to develop in our kids. And I think when we chat next week, I think it should be something that we should be looking at in families. We want people to be wealthy. It doesn't matter what you see, what it looks like. You must know behind everything, like financially, we're comfortable. So let's have a look. I want to have a look at debt. And debt is one of those topics that comes up often in my discussion with people. Debt isn't bad. There's some debt that is essential debt. Susan had to go into debt. John had to go into debt. None of them had the finances or the resources to buy a car. Even if it was a small 40,000 Rand vehicle, they didn't have it. They've come straight out of varsity. Let's say they didn't have support from family. They had to go into debt. How you manage that debt and the decisions you make around your debt is where we start making the mistakes. But having debt isn't the problem. It's when the debt starts consuming us and takes over because we want the new car, the expensive one up front. And so eventually we can't control the debt and the debt follows us forever. So debt isn't the issue. And I've used this graph because it's always an interesting one where we have a look at a time frame as to basically what John did and what Susan's done. So people go, if I take the money and I rather service the debt, is it not better than stick it into an investment? And this is a 10-year graph showing the difference between you taking money to stick into your credit card or to service debt. So if John had, let's call it, he had 30,000 Rand, it was his bonus that was paid to him, and he had two options, one to invest it for 10 years or one to stick it into lowering his payment on his vehicle over the next couple of years. So I've used a 10-year sort of graph, and we can look at as maybe a bond or a house, whatever it is. The compounding effect of the investment is always going to put you in a better position versus the interest that you would essentially just pay off by servicing that debt with a little bit of money that you've got set aside. And you can pretty much use most numbers on this. Over time, if you get it right, your investment is going to be better than the debt and servicing the debt. And that's why if you can avoid getting yourself into debt that just goes and goes and goes, and you become the Susan who goes, you know what, I have to have debt, but I'm going to manage that. But I'm going to create this other thing, which is going to be the thing that's going to look after me later. It's going to be the investment that I'm going to stick money into, that it's going to allow me to eventually have the wealth that I can make better decisions going down the line. That eventually that debt is going to come to an end because I've now got the finances to buy a new car and I don't need the services of a bank or an institution. I can buy the vehicle and now I've got a whole lot of money that I can carry on building my wealth. And eventually it just becomes more and more and more, and you're in a position to make better decisions. So this is another survey, and this is one from this year. It's quite an interesting one that they did. So this tracks sort of stress factors. So again, taking people and how we managing money, and this has a look now in the decisions that we're making. What are the stress factors that are sort of general with our population? So the first one, 75% of the survey admitting that people are under financial stress. And I think you don't even need a survey to identify that. We know that. You just need to speak to people and you quickly realize there's a lot of people struggling with financial stress. A lot of people then in the survey said it's affecting their homes. We just have to read the newspaper and go back a year or two, the effects of COVID and what has happened, and just have a look at how many suicides that we've had as a result of financial decisions. People just getting themselves into a position where they struggle. Top 3 reason for divorce, money. And that's not just South Africa. I think that's a global problem. Financial reasons are one of the big reasons as to why people separate and get divorced. So I found quite interesting that females are more stressed about financial decisions and managing money than males are. And I think the reason for them, I've put that there, is that I think it's because they're more willing to say that they're stressed. I think you probably find in the survey that when these men were asked, they're probably not as comfortable saying that they're stressed or they're worried or they're struggling. Whereas perhaps a lady is more comfortable saying, look, I am struggling. It's not working. I'm struggling to manage things. And so maybe they're just more open. But it was interesting that there are so many ladies that are finding managing money stressful, because I've always had the belief that they just manage money better. And so it almost doesn't stress them out as much as it maybe stresses out the gentleman that I speak to. So it was quite an interesting stat that I found. 62% of people earning between 20 and 35 have unsustainable debt. So that's that economics 101. Spending more than they're earning. And they say the number after the 35,000 actually is worse. It carries on. So just because you're earning a lot, you think, oh, these people are comfortable. They're not, they've got money. They're not struggling. The problem goes right up. And in fact, they referenced there were even CEOs. So these are people earning big salaries saying that they're struggling with exactly the same thing. It's that lifestyle creep that I spoke about. All you do is you change your lifestyle based on the income. So somebody who is struggling, who earns more and more, eventually you're in the same place, because you go from that car to that car to that car to that car. You go from eating at this place to eating at that place to eating at that place. You go from eating this kind of food to that kind of food to that. It slowly just goes with you. If you can't manage it, it's always going to be there. And most people said the reason that they're struggling, they're stressed, is they don't know who to go to. They don't know who to talk to. And so you kind of just bottle it up and you try and manage this whole thing on your own. So these are the three things tonight that I want us to sort of take away from the whole thing. So the first thing are, what are your recurring commitments? What are those things out of your spending that are there all the time? And of those things, which of those things are needs and which are wants? So I'm going to go back to our story earlier, is that when I left my salary to go and start a business that had zero, we quickly had a look at the things to go, what are we spending money that we don't actually need? And when you start going through those line items, you realize you're spending a lot of things on things that if you scratch that out, it wouldn't change your life at all. So a simple thing like a gym membership. I was probably going to the gym maybe once or twice. That's expensive to go to the gym. I think those might have been like 190 Rand or something a month. One visit to the gym, 190 Rand, that's an expensive gym visit. Now, if you're using it 20 times maybe, then you go, that's not too bad. But if you're not using it, it's expensive. It's those things of going, what do I cut out here? What are things that I don't need? Or how do I do that thing just a different way? So identifying those things. Convenience. Convenience costs us money. And it's about identifying those things as well. Are there things that you're doing because it's convenient that's costing you? Is there a way that you can change it and do it slightly differently so that you can start using that money somewhere else? Managing those finances somewhere else to better equip you. And then that last one is lifestyle creep. Be careful of the lifestyle creep that's maybe already happened, or the thing that when you do get the promotion, when you do change the job, be aware of it, because it's real. It happens to every person if we're not careful. So manage that thing. And then I'm going to end off tonight with just, it's something which, I think we've all had it. It's that email that we get of the lotto that we won, the Nigerian lotto, or the one in the UK. And you go, surely people are not being caught out with this. And the only reason those emails go out, or the SMS, is because they are catching you out. They're definitely catching people out, otherwise those things would stop. And so when we anything with money, when you read something, when you receive something, when you get the phone call, you've got to be so careful about how you handle it and how you deal with it. And so these are just some of the things that we become sort of used to in discussions with our clients, or things that are happening. And so I've put a couple up here just so that we can sort of point them out, and just maybe you're a little bit more aware of them going forward. So don't open accounts for other people. Be careful of that. And you go like, who's doing that? People are. They're opening an account on behalf of somebody else using your details. Because once your details are attached to that, they're going to come after you. So don't do it. Be careful. Because if it does happen and the person gets themselves into trouble, you're going to be attached to that. Impersonating credit card agencies. Endless stories of people getting a phone call from, this is so-and-so bank. We've noticed some fraudulent transaction on your account. We just need to check it out. Can you give me, no, nothing ever over the phone. And I'm always surprised because the banks tell us that they will never do that, or they'll never send you an email asking you to click on a link, and yet people still get caught out with that. If you receive anything, my philosophy is always, and if ever I get phoned, I'll say, thank you very much, your name, sir, I'll get it down, and then what I'll do is I'll phone the bank back, because I've got the telephone number of my bank. I'll phone and I'm going to ask for you, and then we can sort out, because then I know at least it's going back to where it's supposed to be. But I will then contact the branch of the bank that I bank with, and I will speak to somebody. And then, if it is legit, we'll establish what the problem is and sort it out. But don't receive a telephone call and work from there, assuming that this person sounds like they are legit. Obviously, they've trained. These are criminals. They're not going to phone you and stutter through a process and make it sound like, there's no ways I can trust this guy. These guys have practiced. They've trained themselves to the point where they're going to make you believe that they're from whatever institution. Anything that you receive via text, via email, SMS, WhatsApp, always go, can't be. Again, if I was running the bank, would I be sending out this random thing hoping that people would answer it or whatever it is? If you get something, always do your follow-up work. Don't assume that that thing is now correct. And if you click on it, it's going to solve the problem. Social media is one of those things. Be careful. People will troll your Facebook sites, your accounts. They'll be able to see what you like, what you follow, and they'll be able to create something that is directed specifically at you. So they've noticed that you are one of those people that follow animal shelters and stray animals, whatever it is. It's so easy for me to hook onto you now and get you to please donate to this worthy cause. You just have to do X, Y, and Z. Shane, it sounds terrible. There's a couple pictures of animals that look hurt. I want to help out. And so you log on and you do whatever you need to do, and within seconds, somebody's in your account. So be careful of just being hooked into that stuff. And you'll know about the stuff that sort of follows you on your Facebooks. You go and you do a search on Google, and the next day, all of a sudden, there's adverts linked to that thing. It's found you, it's tracked you. There are people following those things all the time. ATM scams. Be careful if you are working around an ATM. If you're having problems with your card, be aware that there are people that are watching. And I spoke to an advocate a little while ago, and I was horrified the stories that they were telling me of how people are watched. And you just go, surely in East London, that can't be happening. And it's legit. There are people sitting in parking lots. That's what they do. They are watching to see what's happening, and they follow to see who's popping at that ATM every single day, and they track that kind of stuff. Or they're sitting in shopping centers and they're watching movements of people. And eventually they start seeing patterns, they start becoming familiar with people. Be careful of that sort of stuff. If you're drawing money from an ATM, when you go there, have a look around. Be aware of your surroundings and don't ever allow anybody to come and assist you. There's no need, unless you're actually at the bank and you've called somebody who's working there to help you. Don't allow anybody, even if they look like they're a security guard or they're there to assist you because maybe you were having some problems. Be aware of the ATM scams. There's a lot of them. Job scams is another one, and we know a family that luckily didn't get caught up in it. But obviously, again, trolling, having a look at somebody, knowing where they were going, what they were doing, what they're interested in. It's easy with the amount of people who don't have jobs. It's easy to try and entice somebody to a job as long as they do X, Y, and Z. And a lot of those times, it's people needing to put down deposits for them to get onto a waiting list or something. You put down a 2,000 Rand deposit and you hook 100 people. It's a lot of money you've made out of doing nothing. So beware of those sorts of things that are happening. Charity scams goes again with the sort of just emotional side of things. People follow you, they see where you potentially would be happy to spend money, and they then target you on that. Be careful, and I mean, I do it, we all do it. Unfortunately, in a public space, you need to quickly get onto the Wi-Fi. Those things are not always secure. Be careful of joining the Wi-Fi networks, because once you're in there, you don't know what's actually happening in the background. So just, it's something to be aware of. It's recommended that you change your passwords. And again, fault. I don't often do it. Another thing is try and not have the same password for everything. My fault as well. I also do that because it's just easy. I can't remember all these different things. But it is those sorts of things which people, because if I can get into one and I know this person has got a habit of just doing the same thing, you probably find his passwords exactly the same thing. If I get into one, I'll be able to hack into all the others. Change those passwords, have 3 or 4 of them potentially, and just rotate them. But just, yeah, be careful of that. Don't give personal details to people. And it even goes to that one, the passwords and pins. Be careful of who you do. So rather not even give it, but be careful of who you do because you don't know what they're going to do. It's not that they might tell somebody, but they might then land up writing it down so that they don't forget it, and then you don't know who sees that. So be aware when you hand those things out, who you're giving it to, and try and avoid giving that stuff out because you don't know what happens once they have that info. And I'm going to end off with it. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So be careful. Unless you entered the lotto, you probably haven't won it. So I hope tonight there's something that just makes you think a little bit differently. I'm hoping that, yeah, you can take it away and go, actually, you know what, I need to do that differently. I've got to go and have a look at that. I need to be more conscious. I need to be aware of how I manage the money. And like I say, next week, if you do know people they've got young families, they've got young children, it's not aimed at the children, but it's aimed at the parents because a lot of next week's talk is just around family money management and how in a family we should manage the money better together. How do we talk about it in the families? And then as parents, what we can be doing with our kids that eventually, hopefully, when they get into the world, they are better equipped. They make better financial decisions with the money. So thank you for joining. And I hope that next week you're back and we bring some people with us. Thank you.